We've all heard phrases like forgive and forget, but what does it really mean? And can we truly forgive the unforgivable? Derrida once said, "There is only forgiveness if there is any where there is the unforgivable." Sounds confusing, right? How can we forgive the unforgivable if it is by definition unforgivable? To understand Derrida's concept, I think we have to first understand the very concept of forgiveness. According to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, to forgive is to respond in a particular way to someone who has treated someone badly or wrongly. Remember the time where you forgave your friend for canceling plans at the last minute, or when your sibling borrowed something without asking. These everyday scenarios are small acts of forgiveness that play a crucial role in our lives. By choosing to forgive in these situations, it helps strengthen our relationships and creates an environment of trust and understanding. Just imagine a world where no one forgave anyone. Relationships would be filled with bitterness and tension. When we are wronged, it usually damages our relationship with the wrongdoer. Minor offenses can create tension that puts strains on the relationship that then burdens both person involved, while serious offenses might lead the victim to end the relationship altogether. For example, if your ex cheated on you, this serious offense made you end the relationship, and after your ex may come and ask for your forgiveness. But this is where we usually get it wrong. Usually, when people ask for forgiveness, what they're actually hoping is for reconciliation. And while reconciliation and forgiveness often go hand in hand, they're not the same. In some cases, restoring the relationship can be unsafe or unhealthy because reconciliation would expose someone to further psychological harm, and in this case it might be better to forgive without reconciliation. And sometimes the wrongdoer might even be unwilling or unable to reconcile. For example, if your ex blocked you, you can still forgive them without reconciliation. But we could also say that in some cases there is even reconciliation without forgiveness. Another example of this, you might have gotten back into a relationship with your ex that cheated on you without really forgiving them, which, let's be honest, in most cases just makes the situation worse, as there is unspoken resentment and anger, eventually leading to another breakup. This shows how important it is to separate reconciliation from forgiveness. But like I said, even though forgiveness doesn't always lead to reconciliation, it's often what we're hoping for. When we ask an ex to forgive us, we're usually hoping to make things better. However, if we decide to reconcile and try to forgive, forgetting can be very difficult. Philosophers like Levinas and Arendt suggest that forgiveness can purify the past. In The Human Condition, she explains that one key aspect of action is that it is irreversible. It can't be undone. However, she argues that forgiveness has the incredible power to reverse the impact of an action that led to an unexpected consequence. In this way, forgiveness undoes what was done, not for the sake of the action, but for the person who did it. Levinas in Totality and Infinity elaborates this idea by saying that forgiveness is like turning back time. By forgiving, the forgiver reshapes the past. Although the action did happen, forgiveness wipes it away, preventing those actions from defining permanently the wrongdoer. By forgiving, both parties can view their shared history in a new, less negative light, rather than being stuck with a fixed, hurtful perspective. For example, imagine you run unexpectedly into your ex who hurt you deeply. You decide to have a coffee and talk things over. During this conversation, you both gained new insights on each other's perspectives, and so you decided to forgive each other. This act of forgiveness doesn't necessarily mean that you'll reconcile or start your relationship over again, but it means that you both decided to let go of past hurt to move forward with a sense of peace. In this case, there has been an explanation or an apology for this forgiveness to happen, and this is what we call conditional forgiveness. This concept revolves around the idea that for forgiveness to be morally significant, it must be grounded in certain conditions. Philosophers such as Murphy suggest that an apology or genuine repentance is necessary for forgiveness. In our previous example, the explanations and sincere apologies from your ex is what helps you forgive them, because them apologizing shows a recognition of the harm that was done. But what if you saw your ex and they never apologized, maybe even putting the blame on you? In this case, you might find it really hard to forgive them. Well, because their lack of acknowledgement for their wrongdoings can make you feel like forgiving them would be tolerating their behavior that seemed morally wrong to you. However, some would argue that forgiveness is a personal choice and an emotional process that doesn't necessarily require an apology from the wrongdoer. Rather than being about morality, forgiveness can be seen as a decision to let go of anger and resentment, regardless of the wrongdoer's actions. In this case, the act of forgiving is usually done for the benefit of the forgiver, rather than a reaction to the wrongdoer's apologies or lack thereof. Another example of this would be that when you broke up with your ex, you felt betrayed and they never apologized or maybe even never answered to your text. But as time passes by, instead of letting the betrayal control your emotions, you decided to forgive as a way to regain your peace of mind, even if your ex never acknowledged their wrongdoing or gave you an explanation. In this case, you've never received an apology for the hurt they caused you, but you still decided to forgive them, because your act of forgiveness wasn't based based on receiving an apology or any direct communication from your ex, but it was a personal choice. By forgiving them, you allowed yourself to move forward with peace and emotional closure, even in the absence of official closure or an apology from your ex. But is choosing forgiveness always possible? What about the unforgivable? Acts like severe betrayal, violence, or injustice. How can one possibly forgive the unforgivable? In The Sunflower, Wiesenthal, a Holocaust survivor, meets a dying Nazi soldier who asks for forgiveness. His story raises a very hard question. Can we forgive something as terrible as this? Now that we have understood forgiveness of minor or more serious offenses, let's try to see if it's really possible to forgive the unforgivable. By the way, most of what I'm going to explain now was found in the following paperwork. According to Derrida, if there is forgiveness, it must forgive the unforgivable, such as the logical aporia. If one had to forgive only what is forgivable, then one would not forgive. Jacques Derrida's ideas of forgiveness were influenced by Jankélévitch and Arendt. Jankélévitch, in his books Le Pardon and L'Imprescriptible, argues that crimes committed during World War II, especially in the death camps, are unforgivable. Jankélévitch also says that forgiveness is impossible if the person that committed the crime doesn't ask for it. When France decided the crimes against humanity should never have a time for prosecution, making it imprescriptible, Jankélévitch agreed. According to him, normal legal rules like statutes of limitations, usually applicable to common law crimes, do not apply for such horrible crimes. To which Derrida argued, forgiveness is not, it should not be normal, normative, normalizing. It should remain exceptional and extraordinary in the face of the impossible, as if it interrupted the ordinary course of historical temporality. Derrida argues that true forgiveness can only come from what is considered unforgivable. Forgiveness must therefore do the impossible. It must undergo the test and ordeal of its own impossibility in forgiving the unforgivable. And well, Derrida's concept of forgiveness is built on a paradox. Because if forgiveness forgave only the forgivable, then Derrida says that the very concept of forgiveness would disappear. However, Derrida does emphasize that we shouldn't confuse forgiveness with reconciliation or other similar terms. Remember our example of you forgiving your ex but not resulting in a reconciliation. But in this case, because it doesn't just concern two people, but rather a society as a whole, I think it's very important to separate forgiveness from pardon or mercy. Pardon is a legal act where an authority, like a president, removes the legal consequences of a crime, often without considering the victim's opinion. Mercy involves a third party, like a judge showing leniency in a situation. Forgiveness is more of a personal and often private act, just like the Holocaust survivor that was battling in his mind whether he should forgive or not the Nazis. Him deciding to forgive or not would mostly depend on his personal beliefs and values. But Derrida's concept of forgiveness does highlight a very important political and social issue regarding history. Many historians suggested that the key to understanding the horrible crimes that happened during World War II lied in examining the events and changes that happened in between World War I and World War II. After World War I, Germany was blamed for the war and punished severely by the Treaty of Versailles. However, Britain and France didn't want to punish Germany too harshly, as they feared it might lead to long-term anger and also harm their economies. In 1929, Germany's reparations, as stipulated by the Treaty of Versailles, were reduced, and in 1932, the reparations were cancelled altogether. But during the 1930s, Europe faced economic troubles and international relations became unstable. Many Germans felt oppressed by their situation, and when Adolf Hitler came along promising a better future, many were drawn to his ideas. He used propaganda, playing with people's fears and hatred, leading to the rise of fascism, and eventually the terrible events of World War II. In this context, we could not only ask ourselves the question, who is entitled to forgive, but have we the right to never forgive an entire nation and risking becoming the next oppressors, creating a never-ending cycle of oppression leading to hatred? Did Derrida mean that we should just accept the atrocities that happened? Well, obviously no, and I'm sure we can all agree that what happened was beyond inhuman. But there is a difference between pardon and forgiveness for a reason. If an entire nation has already been punished so harshly, does it even make sense to choose to never forgive them? So of course I still believe it's up to you to decide whether or not you're able to forgive the unforgivable. But as we saw, I think that forgiveness is mostly about finding peace again. For example, if a friend betrayed you, for you this might seem unforgivable according to your moral values, and you might be telling yourself that you'll never be able to forgive them because you'll never be able to forget. But here again, there's a huge difference between forgiving and forgetting. I think that forgiveness doesn't necessarily mean that you're erasing what happened, but rather that you decided to forgive to move on from the hurt that has been caused. Because human relationships are very complex, and sometimes hurt people, or circumstances make people hurt you unintentionally. As for me, I always remind myself that there were times where I also hurt people, because I am human, and I didn't know at that time what I know now. And when this happens, happened, I sought for forgiveness, which actually meant asking them to acknowledge that I was a human that made a mistake, but that I wasn't necessarily a bad person deep down. So why would I ask for forgiveness, but not be willing to forgive someone in the opposite situation? Of course, here I'm not talking about abusive relationships, even though I still believe that forgiveness here is still essential, but obviously for your own safety without reconciliation. But in these cases, you also need to forgive yourself, and this is where the notion of self-forgiveness is very important. And I think self-forgiveness is important for both parties. If you're the wrongdoer and betrayed someone feeling guilt and remorse, I think you also need to learn how to forgive yourself. Maybe what you did was wrong, but maybe it was the best you could do at that time. What did this teach you, and how can you make sure that it never happens again? I believe that forgiving doesn't mean forgetting or accepting the unacceptable, but it means finding peace.